doing with all this printed material? And why do you need to print that receipt? You've got it. It's digital. It's on your computer. Why do you need, for God's sakes, to print that out? You don't need to print that out.
Right.
Just stop it. Just stop it right now. Stop printing. You don't need to print that.
Welcome to Command Control Power, a weekly podcast hosted by 3 certified members of the Apple Consultants Network, drawing from nearly half a century of combined experience. We talk shop, interview vendors and colleagues, and share what we've learned while operating our technology consulting practices. This is Joe Saponari of SciMac, and my 2 co-hosts are Jerry Zigmont of MacWorks and Sam Valencia of the HCS Technology Group. We also offer a weekly email newsletter which includes show notes for each episode. Learn more at commandcontrolpower.com. And thanks for listening. This episode of Command Control Power is brought to you commercial-free and is made possible by our Patreon sponsors. You can help bring more commercial-free episodes by going to patreon.com/CMDCTRLPWR and supporting the show with a monthly pledge. Thank you for your support of Command Control Power. Thanks very much to our VIP supporters whose generous support earns them a special place at the top of the show. Taylor Boyko, SimpleMDM.com, and John Brown, GroveTech.co. And special thanks to Jason Detbarn of Adigy.com and Adam Angst of Tidbits Content Network, tcn.tidbits.com. Thank you all very much for your support. So a few shows back, I told a story about a client who had dragged out buying a new Mac for months and months and months. And it was just one of these situations where it's so simple. It's like, okay, you have this Mac and it's really old and you haven't called us in a while and your Mac is old and you need a new one. And here's the one we recommend. Why don't you go buy that and then we'll talk again? You know, like it's that should be really simple. It should be like 10 minutes, send an email with this recommendation, computer arrives and we proceed work. But instead it was 3, 4, 5 months of, oh, I didn't order it yet. Is that still what you recommend? I don't know. Let me check kind of thing. And then what if I got a laptop? Sure. You know, yeah. Okay. You know, and it's like these conversations that just goes on for no reason, like over and over. So eventually she decides to go ahead and order the new laptop and the new iMac. She travels a lot. She's got a couple different places she wants to work in, different homes at different places. The iMac stays in the home in Connecticut. So she's going to order both. She gets the MacBook Pro first. It's like on the way. So we scheduled the appointment and everything. She lets me know that they couldn't deliver it. The delivery person couldn't deliver it. And I mentioned this on the show where she's telling me that Grubhub tried to deliver her computer, and I'm just like, what? Right. You know, and I'm like, that doesn't sound right. You know, like I don't know. Apple's been up to some weird stuff lately, but I don't know about Grubhub, you know. But I'm like, in the back of my mind, I'm like, you know, there could be something to this because they just do a new service sometimes and just not tell anybody. Grubhub sounded weird. She's like, my Grubhub driver, blah, blah, blah. So this recently came up on the Mac admin Slack. I forget who posted a link to this on Reddit, but it's the story of a courier that Apple uses canceling delivery, and the person who ordered the computer that's supposedly being delivered by this courier service not receiving the computer, getting the runaround from Apple, supposedly being called a liar, and Apple not even being interested in knowing any more about this and trying to help with this because as far as they're concerned, this courier service had delivered the computer. This person who posted this thing to Reddit said that they never received the computer, and they're saying that the delivery service, who they said is basically just an Uber driver, specifically Uber, not Grubhub, but Uber. Apple hires Uber to come to the store, take the box from the store that this person just ordered online and drop it off at your house. That's this same day, 1 to 2 hour courier service delivery that Apple offers now. My client resolved that issue by, you know, the computer went back to the store and that was it. It was done. The order was done. It wasn't like she could go pick it up in the store. So in that case, she had to place a new order. And then she said, you know, maybe I won't choose this same day option. I'll just choose like a normal delivery method. And I said, yeah, if you choose expedited delivery or just regular shipping, that would be most likely by FedEx and, you know, just like a normal delivery service. So that's probably your safest bet if she was concerned that it wouldn't get there because the driver wouldn't be able to get through the gate or whatever her concern was. So she did that, and sure enough, that worked. But in this case of this post online, they said the delivery driver from Uber just kept the computer, claimed it had been delivered, I guess. So it's just an interesting
Wow.
thing to be aware of. I don't know how this got sorted out. It was posted a couple weeks ago as we record, and I don't see any resolution from the original poster. So take it with a grain of salt. I don't know that this is a widespread issue necessarily, but I'm not sure the courier service is always that reliable. It may seem like the greatest option if they can get it there in an hour or two. If it adds this layer of complication and the risk of some third-party delivery service, it may not be worth that risk. So something to keep in mind.
If I understand this correctly, she was able to get the computer on her second try, but they didn't charge her for the one that supposedly went missing.
Well, I'm conflating two stories here because my
Okay.
client actually had a thing that just said it's been refunded. Your order's been refunded. That's weird. Like, did you ask for a refund? What happened? And she said no, they tried to deliver it and couldn't, and then that was it. They were done. And I don't know if that was missing part of the story in her case. Maybe they did try again. Maybe they tried to reach out to her to like reschedule it and couldn't get her. I'm not sure in that case. But she did get the refund. It was just annoying because we had this all planned, and then she probably had to wait a few days for the refund to hit her card and stuff, and then she had to reorder the computer. So it just caused another delay. In the case posted to Reddit, from Apple's perspective, the courier picked up the computer and then just like never dropped it off to the person who bought it. And I mean, who knows if the driver went missing or whatever, but the person never received their computer. But from Apple's perspective, it was delivered. So that's the issue. And something that was interesting in this story too that happened to this person online was that they said, I don't want to just call my credit card company and dispute the charge, because they said Apple's been known to lock your account if you do that. And I've heard stories of that too. You could get locked out of iCloud if Apple locks the account that you used to actually make the purchase, suspecting it of fraud. You could be locked out of your iCloud account. So that I can understand where they're coming from. That would be pretty disruptive to me if I got locked out randomly in the middle of a workday or something. That would not be fun.
I'm thinking your client, Joe, that lives in the gated community, that's the least of her worries, is to wait for the credit to appear on the charge before she orders another one.
That's probably
She could probably order 10 of them and it wouldn't matter. Yeah.
I know. It's hard to sympathize sometimes when I get these stories from clients where they're like, yeah, I have this problem. I can't get a signal to my gate, where I want video, where I want to be able to see who's arriving at my gate, because the gate is a mile from my house. So, and I'm like, wow.
That's like Jerry's place.
I'm like, did you say a mile? Like, are you serious? Is that real? That sounds like a pretty far, like what kind of prop has one of the dimensions is a mile? I'm not even sure Jerry's castle qualifies. That Jerry, do you have a mile-long drive?
Both of you guys, I got to send you the video. We live right on top of the main road. We're right on the road. There's nothing.
I don't know.
It's a mile away.
Compound is quite large, from what I heard. I saw drone footage.
With how frequently you lose your keys in that place, man. That's a lot of places for keys to hide. Let's put it that way.
That's still kind of interesting to think about, with possible loss, like through a driver or a service. I could just lift it. I mean, you've heard those stories over the holidays about FedEx and UPS drivers taking them. And there were even some security cam footage of people's front doors when the FedEx guy comes, drops something off, sees something available via UPS and swipes that.
Swaps the packages. That's pretty funny.
But I mean, it happens. Still pretty shocking that with all of the tracking technology that exists today, that happens. Speaking of which, have you guys, I don't think I've talked about this before, but there's a guy that puts together these glitter bombs.
Oh man, yes, I've seen that on YouTube. The original one was kind of makeshift, right? And then it got really popular. So he makes some stuff now that's just off the charts as far as
it's incredible. Yeah, the glitter bombs were great in and of itself. The would-be thief would steal something off a porch, and then they would open it, it's just boom. And then he had an iPhone camera or something in there that was recording it the whole time. As of late, he put in stink bombs in there too. So it would just stink up the whole joint when they would open it and just get splattered with glitter. And it was just perfect. The retribution there was amazing.
That's pretty great.
I actually do have a follow-up, less on the technical end, but more on like the work end, because as you guys know, and people that have listened to the show may recall, that I was extremely frustrated a few weeks ago. And I have my bouts with that lately still, of being just busy and not being able to handle my time well and everything like that. And I found it interesting because I was communicating with someone also in the technology field about a client that was taking up space in one of those shared spaces, similar to a WeWork. And we tried to reach out to this person to coordinate a meeting. And we got an auto reply that says, I only check my email twice a day. So if I don't get back to you right away, I'll check back with you. I think it was like a 3 o'clock or 3:30 time frame. There's once in the morning and once in the afternoon. But that was the auto reply for all other times. And she just completely disassociates herself with any connectivity so that she can focus on work that she needs to get done. First of all, I read up a little bit on it, and I thought that was quite a concept that I didn't even think that that would be possible in our field, because just how readily available we always have to be. But there's some good, interesting write-ups I'll post in the show notes about it, just of people using this methodology of staying focused. I did it for 2/3 of the day recently, where I just quit my mail program and put Do Not Disturb on my phone, and I had to get some really focused work done. I have to say it was pretty great because I was able to focus. I wasn't looking at the next ping that came in or the badge on my. The worst part is if I would command tab to look at something and I see a badge on my mail, right? And then I'm like, oh, I got to look at that. I was really able to stay away from a lot and stay focused on my work. And I think I might give this a go, maybe a couple times a week when I really need to. But I thought I'd put it out there.
I've thought about that too. For a while, do you remember back in the day with Merlin Mann and 43 folders? And he was a huge fan of David Allen's Getting Things Done. And I actually saw that book on a friend's side table recently. I read that way back when. Some things are good habits to form, and other things I find in practice, I wonder if you only did email twice a day, could you get it all done? You need a full day to do email at some point. I'm curious from your perspective, Sam, if you put this in place, even just intermittently through the week, on those days where you're only checking email twice a day, how much time do you need at those times to get through your email to get back to inbox zero? And, or do you not get to inbox zero? And maybe that's okay too.
I don't think I can do that every day. I think that's just impossible. If I can do it twice a week, that would be enough for me. When I did check in, and it could have been that it was a slightly lighter day because we're around holiday time and that can happen during these weeks as people go away. When I focused on just filtering out my email for like that half hour in the afternoon, 80% of it was ridiculous garbage that you delete anyway. Stuff that just comes in and that usually you're copied on, or a ticket that you're involved in that you don't have to directly reply to. And a lot of that, I just quickly delete, or get it out of the way. I'll have to judge it based on busier times. Like you said, Joe, I mean, is it feasible to get that out all in one day? I don't know yet. But I know on the day that I did give this a shot, I was actually very productive that day. I ended the day just going, whoa, that just happened. And I think I could try that again, kind of a thing. Who knows if it'll work in practice though, man? I don't know. It was one day that we're talking about right now. So we'll see.
That's a good tip. Keep us posted with your progress. I'm personally very curious about the hiring process you're going through. Probably now's a good time to remind listeners you are hiring. HCS Connecticut is hiring actively.
It's still very hard to find a hire in a lot of different industries. We're going through that struggle. I think the pay is competitive. I think the job description is good. I have it out on Indeed and just recently on ZipRecruiter. I posted it on the Mac Admins jobs board as well, and just telling everyone I know. I've interviewed a few people, but just trying to find the right fit is extremely difficult. I'm looking very aggressively, though, because where I waffled in the past, I can't anymore. We're at a point where I have no choice. I just don't want to hire the wrong person. You've had those experiences, and they're really tough to get over, so I don't want to go through that.
Hiring is really expensive, in the sense of both money, obviously, and time. It can be disruptive in that way. I mean, the stakes are really high. You want it to really work out, and it's hard to know. I mean, I just think it's hard to find someone to meet all the criteria, and then also for the process to go smoothly. So it's a lot. It's a lot. Good luck, man, and keep us all posted. So on my new MacBook Pro, kind of afraid of this dongle hell situation. People used to talk about dongle hell with the Mac, in the last several years, going through this USB-C kind of transition. I mean, we're well through it now, obviously, but I still thought people complain about this, dongle hell. The new MacBook Pros, 14 and 16-inch models, have more ports, more of a variety of ports than just USB-C, Thunderbolt 3 ports. And so people say that that's really great now that they have built-in HDMI, for example. They have built-in HDMI, don't they? I should have known
yes.
This, but thank you. Built-in SD card readers, and a lot of people were...
It's my contribution to the show so far.
Thank you, Jerry. And a lot of people are happy about those additions. I have the M1 MacBook Pro with just 2 USB-C ports. That's what I get, and like you say, Jerry, you get what you get and you don't get upset. I've got these 2 ports, and I have to say, they work great. it's fine. I'm not in dongle hell at all. I have one dongle, which is a USB-C to Ethernet dongle, which I use for the podcast recordings mainly, and really nothing else. I plug my Mac into a monitor using a single USB-C cable to a Dell 4K 27-inch monitor. The monitor's turned off most of the time, but I have it configured to supply power even when the monitor is not acting as a monitor. So my Mac gets power from that one cable. When I turn on the monitor, it lights up with the extended display. It's great. It's easy. I have a second USB-C device, which is the audio interface, and that's it. Do a lot of people go through trouble where it's really frustrating to have a computer with quote unquote only USB-C? I find it really useful. I think it's been great.
Yeah, it depends. If you just have the two USB-C ports, I find that you do need some kind of
Like a hub.
I have a hub made by HyperDrive that I use that's extremely useful. So it's not a difficulty for me. And I expect if you have one like that or something similar, then it's okay. But if you're just dealing with two USB-Cs and you have a bunch of accessories, it can get difficult, I would think.
For me, it's okay, especially since the monitor provides power, which is one of the reasons I chose this monitor that can supply, actually, I think 90 watts in the model I have. So if and when I get a new MacBook Pro that wants more power, it has that. I was also looking into, this is part of the reason that I brought this up, into USB-C hubs for clients. It's funny, you mentioned the HyperDrive. That's the one I found. I found that, this company, HyperDrive, makes a bunch of USB-C hubs and Thunderbolt 3 hubs that seem to serve a variety of purposes. I think the ideal one that I found is like this Gen 2 12-port model with a really good variety of ports, a couple of HDMI ports, a couple of USB 2.0 ports, like the old style connector USB-A ports, I guess. Built-in Ethernet, of course, DisplayPort in case you have a monitor that can use that as a connection. But basically you've got a lot of ways to connect this to various monitors and USB devices, as well as Ethernet. For me, that's pretty much what I need. I would like to have Ethernet, power delivery, ideally a couple of USB-A ports, just to kind of have them for older devices. This hub seems to kind of fit the bill best of all. So the Gen 2 12-port from HyperDrive. Which one do you have, Sam?
I have one that does the wireless charging for the iPhone and then has Ethernet, two USB-C, USB, HDMI. It's fantastic, except for the fact that the new iPhone 13, it does not fit in the cradle for the wireless charging as well anymore. So I kind of have to finagle it in there. But I mean, mine, it's a couple of years old, so I'm not too upset about it. But it does its job very well with the addition of the phone charging. I think it's great.
The interesting thing that you brought up earlier, Joe, where we were talking about dongle hell, we as technicians, our dongle hell was when we were more reliant on USB drives to do OS installations, and then, of course, needing the adapter from USB-C to USB-A. Apple has kind of like done away with a lot of the necessity for that, where, geez, I can't tell you the last time I took out my pouch of operating systems that I needed to install at a client site. And the other thing too, of course, if you're helping somebody onboard a computer, the necessity to even have that tethered has been done away with. Apple has really sort of fast-tracked wireless connectivity or even Ethernet connectivity for these two Macs to talk to each other and migrate. So I think there has been definitely a movement to not necessarily be so reliant on the dongles that we once needed to perform our work.
Yeah, that's a really great point. We're kind of going through that in our office right now. Tim is in the process of cleaning up, kind of reworking our workbench. And we used to have these two Mac Pro towers that we would use to stuff with drives. Like we had all 4 drive bays available. We had booted to like a PCI Express connected SSD. And so we had these 4 bays open so we could do data recovery or secure erase drives. And, by the way, don't confuse the two. That's very important. But you could throw 4 drives in there and run, some secure erase functions to erase them and all. Just recently realized we don't do that. Or if we need to secure erase a drive, we can just put it in some kind of, one of those Weebitech adapters or a cheap little USB adapter, whatever. So we're just rethinking our processes. And one of the ones we've been rethinking is what you mentioned, the need for these USB flash drives with every OS installer, which, by the way, those OS, installers get out of date within a month these days. So, there's no point in having Big Sur 11.6 on a USB drive to install it nice and quick, if you then have to download 11.6.1 very shortly thereafter, right after installing the upgrade from the flash drive. It just, like, to your point, it just really isn't, there isn't really much of a need for lots of flash drives, lots of cables, lots of different adapters and things. I think there's a few that are useful to have. And in fact, HyperDrive makes this 9-in-1. They call it the Power 9-in-1 USB-C hub. It's nice and compact for travel. And I'm thinking of buying this one, although it's $100, but it's got gigabit Ethernet, HDMI, 4K 30 hertz, which is, fine if you just want to plug some random thing in to do a presentation or bring up something on an external screen. Micro SD, which I don't have in my MacBook Pro, but of course the new ones would have SSD card readers, and USB-A ports. This would be like the one thing I might need, which has everything conceivable in it, Ethernet, HDMI, and USB-A for my everyday use. And with this one thing, I pretty much don't need any other dongles and adapters and things or random cables. And yeah, I'm all about simplifying lately. I think this is a really important thing for consultants out there to do, for listeners to think about. How can you simplify your practice of technology consulting? How can you simplify your procedures and do things much more simply? Like, don't be stuck with old methods just because that's the way it was always done. I mean, when I got started in this business 20 years ago, like, we would have, Norton Utilities on a CD and Disk Warrior on a different CD and all this stuff. And then when I started for myself, I started making those SciTool drives, like little USB flash drives with multiple partitions for every different OS version, with every tool you could think of, including like downloads of software to save time when I was on site rather than downloading iLife from Apple. I had iLife on a disk image on this drive, and that was great at a certain point in time, but it just is totally useless now. So it's, I think, important to rethink all that stuff on an ongoing basis.
The bigger thing is, like, how do we get our clients to try to simplify? We have these clients that want to print everything out. And I find it is a certain age, like once they're over a certain age, everything needs to be printed. And I'm thinking to myself, like, what are you doing with all this printed material? And why do you need to print that receipt? You've got it. It's digital. It's on your computer. Why do you need, for God's sakes, to print that out? You don't need to print that out.
Right.
Just stop it. Just stop it right now. Stop printing. You don't need to print that. Yeah, at our house, the only thing we print is the return labels for Amazon.
Right.
Yeah.
There are a few things that you actually need are still relevant. Like, you need to have a printer, but I totally agree. Like, obviously, there's no reason to print most things.
You don't even need to do that. Just show them the QR code now on your phone.
Exactly.
You don't even need to print the label. How do we get our clients to kind of like move into that mode? It's like a couple of shows back, I talked about the AV guy who wanted them to have a NAS drive, with songs. No, they need to stream.
Right.
Get with it. Get with the times.
But I remember a show where you said, I want to have this music downloaded, and maybe that's good for you, just not for your clients. Like, to have that, to have this Synology and manage that,
do as I say, not as I do.
Exactly. Yeah. I guess that makes sense. We all did that to some extent. People have this ideological attitude about things. Like, I do it this way, and that's how I am. Why though? Then to your point, how do you get them to think about it differently? Like, what are you doing with this paper after you print it out? Well, I'm putting it in this folder. Why are you putting it in the folder? Then I know where it is. Let's make a folder on your desktop, called like the big folder where all the receipts go or whatever,
Exactly. I baby stepped them with printing the PDF. You can still do file print if you want, but instead hit this little PDF button and then we'll put it in a folder, exactly like you're talking about, Joe. And that's the baby step. They can still have the action of the print button if they want.
We should write a script or something. When you say print, you send it to the printer. Instead of actually printing the thing out, it prints a page that says, think before you print. Are you sure you really want to print this out? Like, every time you print, you have to deal with this extra step. Really confirm that you really do want to print this out.
You can go a step further and just give them shock therapy. If they hit print, then they get shocked.
Right.
This stuff is all going to go with you. We're going to put that in the hole too, because otherwise your kids are just going to throw this stuff out. So you might as well take it with you. We're gonna pile it in.
Yeah, I mean, dealing with the digital accumulation is bad enough. Sometimes think about that when I'm like helping a client organize their photos and this and that. And it's like always this big project that they'll get to someday. What is the purpose of like most of these photos that live on your computer that after you die, is someone going to go through your entire photo library? Like, I don't even want to go through my own entire photo library to like find the gold. You know what I mean? Let alone it's someone else's responsibility to review your digital life. Forget about accumulating more physical artifacts like printouts. That's just a project that no one will ever want to do. And so I think that's a good way to look at it, is like every time you go to print something, you're really just like creating a new project for yourself. You're creating a new task to deal with this paper. Nobody wants to do that.
And you talk about digital accumulation. I love Apple Notes, the Notes app on my phone, but I've got a big pile of notes. And I always try to get myself to go back in and review this stuff from a couple of years ago. And I'm like, what is this? I don't even know what this means. I'm going to throw this out. I'm accumulating that digital detritus. There's our show title right there. I can't imagine all these people just like printing this stuff out. It's just ludicrous.
Yeah. How about the Dropbox app opting people in to upload their desktop documents and downloads folders? I find that so offensive. That's now something that people need to call me about when they inevitably screw something up, because Dropbox opts them into that. I've had it cause issues. In theory, it would just like result in them taking up too much space in their Dropbox and having to pay Dropbox more money. That's, usually the outcome. But I've actually also had this get partially turned on. I don't know exactly what the circumstances were, but where someone's desktop folder became a symlink to the desktop folder in Dropbox. The feature was turned off. Their desktop was in Dropbox, but Dropbox didn't think that the Mac backup feature was turned on. So it became like this like inconsistent state. The desktop folder was redirected to Dropbox, but Dropbox didn't think that the feature was turned on. So you couldn't turn it off. And I wasn't sure what the right steps were. It's not listed in any support article I could find to actually undo that. And if you turn it on, it was like, there's an error. Can't just like turn it on because it's already on. It just doesn't know that it's turned on. So it was just a mess. I find it offensive that they opt people into that.
When you look at it, they're just trying to compete with iCloud. So they're saying, well, iCloud does this. We want to do this too. We want to give this person the option if they're already subscribing to Dropbox. Rather than Apple taking their money, what offends you about Dropbox wanting to do that?
It's the opt-in part. That said, I think for a while, I don't know if this is still the case, but Apple was also opting people in with iCloud. I don't know if that was the case, though. I would find that also kind of offensive. We did get some of those calls where people had turned this on and screwed something up and needed help figuring out with iCloud desktop and documents folder syncing.
Right, but they are asking them to opt in. I'm going to play devil's advocate here for a moment. So Dropbox is saying, do you want to turn this on? So
it's opt out, meaning like the boxes are checked by default. So they are opting people in.
Okay.
Yeah. You have to know to uncheck those boxes or click not now. If you just proceed through the Dropbox app setup, you're going to end up with this feature turned on.
If in fact they did turn it on, right, you just got a little duplication of backup because iCloud may be enabled as well, because they can both simultaneously be enabled. So what's wrong with that?
I mean, I was wondering that if that would cause any issues with them both being enabled. So that's kind of interesting if it is compatible.
You could ask Sam. He's Mr. Apple.
Yeah, Mr. Apple. What about that?
What, is it causing problems between the two?
I'm curious. I mean, iCloud Drive does the same thing. It like creates a symlink, right, and like redirects it to like the iCloud folder instead of the home folder. Like instead of a folder, it moves it to the iCloud Drive folder.
I think Dropbox actually does it better now. I mean, I always deselect that box just like you, Joe, or at least try to when I'm setting it up for users. But I guess I hear Jerry's point in the fact that like, what's the difference? I want to think that Apple does it better, and it's also built into the OS, And I just don't like Dropbox as much. I mean, I think probably there's some personal bias at stake there for me.
Right.
Yeah, but and Dropbox was doing this for years beforehand when they would get people, they would ask the same thing about the photos.
Camera.
Right.
Right. Ugh, yeah, that was so annoying. I shouldn't complain. I could probably go back and look how much money have I made in undoing that for clients when they're like, my Dropbox is full, and I'm like, well, you don't need to use this camera roll syncing feature, so let's just turn that off. These are already in Photos app, and we recommend iCloud instead, and you're already paying Apple $2 a month or whatever. So that's, I mean, I've had a lot of calls where I've made some money doing that, but I still find it annoying that Dropbox tries to get more of your data and and clearly their incentives are such that they would want to have people turn these features on so that they could overrun the free Dropbox and have to pay Dropbox. It's not a side benefit to Dropbox that they have these features for free accounts. I guess first party, I agree. I think first party is different than third party. If Apple wants to do that, that's one thing. If Dropbox tries to do that as part of their standard process, I don't know. I just don't think of it as part of the Dropbox feature set that most people care about. And maybe that's why.
Now let's see how you feel when Apple doesn't want to fix your computer port that's not working anymore for free. Let's see how you feel about Apple. Let me ask you about that, Joe, because you said you've gotten some paid support by people by disabling that. So you're in a situation like that. This is a philosophical question. So now you've unchecked, don't load the photographs up to Dropbox. You see that the photographs that they had uploaded to Dropbox is using some significant space. And you kind of know, at least you think you know, that it's in iCloud photos. Would you just go in as a consultant and grab all those photographs that are in the Dropbox and delete them? And the reason why I ask this is because my policy has been lately is like, you know what? I'm not touching anything.
Yeah.
I don't want to delete anything that's yours. So how do you reconcile that, or what do you do?
I completely agree. I don't want to delete anything, and I would always err on the side of an overabundance of caution. And so I would say, to be thorough and definitive about it, we would take this folder of these photos that Dropbox has been capturing from your phone and whatever other devices as you plug them in, and we would prepare an import into Photos app and let it determine that,
Deal
100%
with the
of them.
duplicates.
Yeah, like it should ideally say like already imported or whatever. The other annoying thing though, and because I don't know if that works every time, I think Dropbox changes the name of the files helpfully. It instead of using whatever the original like image underscore whatever, does its own thing. I forget, but I'm pretty sure that the names are different. And some people have photos going back for years in there because it's just been doing its thing and they did have enough storage until they overrun it or whatever. And so it can be a significant amount of space that sometimes we do. Like if they have a paid Dropbox and this feature is turned on, they don't even notice it because it's just sitting there collecting their photos and putting them on Dropbox. But it's also, of course, saving them on their Mac. So sometimes we want to turn the feature off. We don't want to create a project, have to review the photos. So ideally, maybe we could just move them out of Dropbox so they're not taking up space in Dropbox anymore, but they're still taking up space on the Mac. So then you have to, it's eventually going to be a problem that somebody has to deal with. Either just delete it, hold your breath, hope for the best, or do the import thing where you hope that Photos app can definitively determine it already has these photos and it's, not going to generate duplicate.
You could do what the client does because they always think, well, why can't we just move these to that Time Machine volume you have plugged in there? Why can't we'll just move them on there? Then you have to take a deep breath and say, well, that's really not a backup, is it?
It's only in one place now. Now it's on your, it's on an external hard drive. You can call it a backup, but if it's nowhere else, it's unique data. What if that drive fails? Oh yeah.
Yeah, we just took that box that was in your house and we moved it in the garage. It's not in both places.
Exactly, right. Well, the other thing is Dropbox in Monterey requires full disk access, or at least it did when I looked at this a week or two ago. So
yeah, who cares? I give them full disk access.
Right.
Whatever it takes.
How much access do you want? You got it. Yeah, but it wasn't asking for it, and it was just like throwing errors and stuff. So we had to I figured that out through like a Dropbox forum post that was 30 pages long. So that, yeah. And that's another reason I just, the more stuff you let Dropbox do, the more potential for issues there could be. And the harder it is to unwind your relationship with Dropbox, I guess is kind of my other concern there.
I know what you're getting at with Apple. You mentioned first party. I'm kind of okay psychologically with that. I'm using their products. I'm using their hardware. Why not be in bed with their software as well? But then along comes Dropbox. It's like, ew, no, I don't want to do that. That's
right.
Why would I sync that? That's terrible. I mean, I've since moved away from Dropbox for Business as of recently, and believe it or not, starting to use Microsoft SharePoint and OneDrive for centralization because we're using it for 365 anyway. We're paying for those services.
Right.
So now I'm like, why am I going to pay Dropbox an annual fee for a business license when I already pay for it on 365? So I'm forcing myself to get better at the SharePoint and OneDrive, even though it's still a little clunky in my opinion.
Have you ever had a conversation with a client who they hear these names thrown around, SharePoint and Google's product or Microsoft's product, OneDrive, somebody who's got some sort of hosted Exchange account through somebody like GoDaddy, send the letters to Joe. And then they say, yeah, but I want to be in the Google. How do I get on the Google Drive?
Yeah.
Well, you've got hosted Exchange, so it looks like you're getting this through GoDaddy, or they could be getting it directly from Microsoft. So you have that. They can't parse out the difference between OneDrive, Google Drive, which is now called what? Workspace, right?
Yeah.
Google
And
Workspace.
Dropbox. Is Dropbox like OneDrive? And I'm like, well, no. And they have these real conceptual problems with it. I don't blame them.
I think you have to go back to first principles. You kind of have to go back to, okay, well, like, what is it we're trying to achieve here? You want your stuff and you want it to be available to you on different devices. You've got your iPhone with you when you're not at home. And, wouldn't it be nice to be able to bring up that PDF that was on your desktop? Well, it's on your desktop, on your Mac back at home. So that means it's an iCloud Drive if you're using that feature of iCloud Drive. So you just go into the Files app on your iPhone. You can get it. It's kind of like just, going back to what the goals are in practice. Like, what are you looking to do? I'm thinking from the perspective of like residential clients, obviously. A business client is going to just do whatever the business is doing. A residential client, like you said, Jerry, I mean, they have these conceptual like difficulties managing all this stuff in their head and understanding. And somebody might say to them, you got to get the Google, or you got to get the cloud. They don't quite know where that fits. And it turns out they're already doing that. They're just using a different service for that. So what do you want to do here? It'd be nice to have passwords, when I leave. Okay, well, forget about all of the above and just use iCloud Keychain, whatever.
I've dealt with these entrepreneurs, these 1 and 2 man shops, and they're like, well, everybody's telling us we should be on OneDrive, and it looks like we're on Google Workspace, but should we be on Dropbox? Does Dropbox work like, thinking like, look, I'll go through this with you, but clock's running.
Right. It's like if you're trying to save a few bucks a month by switching carriers, switching vendors, you have to calculate like, is it worth spending the time with me to take you through that process? To spend an hour or two. Maybe there's a few people that need to be reconfigured or whatever. Is it worth it? Like, will you make that money back? I mean, will your experience be better every day? Maybe that makes it worth it, or maybe you just want to, downsize and cancel this other service over here since now you don't have a need for the rest of the features or whatever. And maybe that makes it worth it. But for a lot of people, it's just, why switch? Is it working? Great. Just keep doing what you're doing.
Sam, when you come across a client who's saying, okay, so if I'm with Microsoft, you tell me I should be 365, but you're telling me the best experiences with using Outlook, and I really like Apple Mail, and I like contacts and calendar. How do you have those conversations? Sometimes it's frustrating.
First of all, Apple Mail just frustrates me to hell anyway, and I still use it every day. It's hard for me to not sympathize with someone that wants to use Apple Mail because that's what I know and love as well. I still hate Outlook for whatever reason, even though I'd have to recommend it sometimes to my clients. It is a difficulty, but I do think that I start thinking like down the line, what do I have to support? Do I have to support Dropbox and 365 and Google for another service, or can I meld this all into one? Yeah, there'll be some pain points initially because people have to learn some new stuff and they'll have to figure it out. But then I have it all under one roof. It might help them billing wise too, which is always a nice benefit. But I kind of like throwing it in under one house if I can, if it makes sense. Like I got this one company, they have like terabytes of data in Dropbox. And I'm like, well, I'm not moving that. That's terrible. Keep it there. I don't want anything to do with that. Just leave it there and we'll keep doing that, even though you have Microsoft. I think it depends on the size and the scope. But what's funny, Jerry, is you were mentioning like these startups and stuff. I've had a few of those too, where it's like 2 people, 3 people, and this is a little off topic from what we're talking about in terms of the services. But all of them lately seem to be telling me the exact same thing. Yeah, we're 2 people, but we're growing rapidly. We're going to be 10 by next quarter, and then like 60 by the end of the year. I'm like, what? I'm like, you guys are, and they're all throwing out these major fucking numbers, and then it's 6 to 8 months later, and maybe they hired 1 person. I'm like, where did all this stuff come from? Nothing. And I saw dollar signs when I signed you, and now it's still 2 people.
Well, when they say we're going to have 10 by next quarter, you just say, well, I'll start charging you for 10 now, then, and we'll just ramp up.
You put somebody with Office 365, you got a mixed environment, PCs and Macs. The people that want to roll down the road and use Contacts, Calendar, and Apple Mail, you let them do that?
I hear what you're saying, like uniformity wise and stuff like that.
Sure.
Depends on the company. I mean, like certainly if there's 10 people in the office, and especially if they're a mixture of Windows and Mac, then we're going to standardize on Outlook, even though I'm seeing a lot more that I even knew that's still not available for Mac on the Outlook side of things. I thought that was getting better, but I still see some gaps. I would standardize on something like that. But I've had some small mom and pops where they're like, well, I like Apple Mail. I'm like, cool, fine. What do I care? Keep using that. It depends.
I still typically recommend Apple Mail, even though it has its issues.
Yeah.
I think everything has issues, really. And, and like you, Sam, I use it every day myself, again, first party. So it's like, it's just built in. I mean, that's going to be the default for most people. But if they have an Exchange account of any sort, or they're coming from a PC, I do typically recommend Outlook in those cases. And we have some companies that where people use both, one or the other, or both in some cases. So
yeah.
I like this idea of like, why I'm thinking to myself, like, why don't I standardize in a couple of these larger 10 to 20 person clients? It would potentially be simpler just to have everybody use the same software. We like to defer to users sometimes when they like to use certain software, they're comfortable with it. Like, who am I to tell them that we don't allow it or support it? I could do that. I don't have any real strict reason not to support both.
The other thing too is a lot of times these clients, they won't sign up for your managed service plan and they're on time and materials. That throws standardizing out the window. I think if they're paying for managed care, managed service, that's a time where you can really keep everybody on a really solid installed base. Otherwise, if it's time and materials, it's like, forget it. Guys, do what you want.
Right. And again, for their benefit, you would have to charge them more if you want to allow them to use any app they want. Whereas if you can standardize, they understand that your support is more efficient, and therefore that's what gets them the rates and costs that they're getting. So it makes sense in those cases too. Did you guys know that TechSoup has a support service? Basically, like they do Windows support under this brand called Tech Impact.
Have you used it? Because I saw that, but I don't have any experience with it.
No, I have a client that had been using them. It's actually a prospect that I think will be joining us. They were using them, and they don't really do Mac support. So as far as I understand, Windows support mainly or only. But I thought it was interesting that they specifically focus on the nonprofit sector. I'm, of course, aware of TechSoup for different licenses for specifically for nonprofits, although I think a lot of companies do that directly now. It used to be like you'd go through TechSoup, and I don't know if there's necessarily a huge benefit to doing that in a lot of cases. Jerry, I think you had posted about this at one point on the Mac Admin Slack about nonprofit licenses for something. Don't bother going through TechSoup.
I've just never found TechSoup to be a helpful resource. It ended up my client was paying something to them. We found that just going directly with Microsoft and Google, that's the way to go. You just have to find the right pages to go to and be patient and navigate the waters and deal with the big bureaucracy. But once you get past all that, that's what TechSoup does. It's supposed to make it easier for the person to get on board and get these discounted rates. But I'm all for cutting out the middleman.
Right. Yeah, it seems like more and more these days you have the option to go directly to the vendor. So, but yeah, I thought that was interesting. I was curious if anybody out there has had an interaction with them. It looks like also on TechSoup's own site, they list services like what they call managed IT. So I'm not sure actually the relationship between TechSoup and Tech Impact, because I'm not seeing a link out to Tech Impact on TechSoup here. So I wrote down this observation recently, as I sometimes do, thinking this could be something I'll talk about on the show. And a lot of times it's just a way that I vent, like a frustration in the moment. I'm like, at least I can talk about it on the show, maybe get a laugh out of it. So right. My quip here is that Apple cares so much about user privacy, they sometimes have no idea what's going on. It's like, and I feel like this thing about like, Tim Cook, like looking like really, like with this utmost respect for user privacy and like really standing by, Apple's like corporate edict about how much they care about privacy. It's kind of like a cover for the fact that they're like, their services are sometimes not great, like their ability to understand what you mean is not great. And it's sort of like, again, it's a crutch. They're like, well, like, because we don't like to collect all the data about you, like, we're keeping everything so private that like when you type a search query, like we really have no idea of what the context is for this. So like the example was, I'm looking up the distance to one of my client locations. So I, click on the client in the Maps app on my Mac, and then I click on directions and I type in my office address, High Street, Like, I don't care about the number and the town. Like, it should just figure out that this is a contact I use. It's my work address in my contact card. It's an address that I map from all the time. Apple thinks that I'm looking for a location. I'm looking for directions to a client in Connecticut from a location on High Street in New South Wales, Australia. Like, why would anyone look that up? It should just be a disqualifier. Like that, I'm not going to get driving directions between like continents. That's just doesn't make any sense, like, but Apple's like, so you're like, your data is so safe with us, like we don't even know what we're talking about here. Like, it's like, we don't even know what country you're in. Like, I don't care, I was so frustrated. I'm like, do I really have to like type in my entire complete address for you to know that I'm like literally looking for something, directions within the state of Connecticut,
continental United States,
right? Like, give me. I don't. It's like if it would be better if it made a mistake of like looking for an address, on High Street in Colorado somewhere. Like, at least I would understand that. It's like, why Australia? Really? Like, that's your best guess, Apple? Like, I'm looking for driving directions from Australia. It doesn't make any sense. That's how private they are. Hey, everybody. You may have noticed that we've been more vocal lately about asking for help from our listeners to support the show by making a pledge on Patreon. And we want to thank those who've answered that call. And we also want to take the time to sincerely thank the patrons whose strong support really does help sustain the show week after week. Ryan Gowdy, CoreCompetent.com. Cirrus Partners, GoCirrus.com. Weldon Dodd, RewindTech.com. Kevin Ginger, KGinger.com. Richard Wingfield, EnvisionDesign.net. Adam Rice, AskAdam.io. Tim Nyberg, TheMacGuys.com. Mac Admins Podcast, podcast.macadmins.org. Michael Thompson, Origin84.com. Matthew Waples, Waples.net. Jerome Potters, MacPot.nl. Tom Poles, BoxIT.tech. Andy Espo, CallAndy.com. Steve Sorbo, MacSOS.biz. And Nate Sinall, WeAreScout.com. We'd also like to thank our patrons at any level, including the anonymous patrons, some of whom have been with us for over 4 years. For a list and links to our patrons, visit commandcontrolpower.com. And to become a patron or support the show on any level, click on support. And thanks for listening.
Jerry does his voices of customers of all kinds.
Am I on the cloud?
Joe spins his